My stepson and his wife refused to let me in during their housewarming. She even said, "It's $1,300 for non-family entry," demanding money. When I said, "Okay, I'll leave," and walked away, they laughed. But 3 days after I went to the bank, their house. "What brings you here? No way you can come in since you're a stranger." My son and his wife, who had been living with us, decided to move out after building their new single-family home. Their new house was finished, and today was the housewarming party for friends. I decided to go to celebrate, but my son and his wife turned me away at the gate, saying something unbelievable. "If you really want to come in, pay an entrance fee of $1,300. Her words were so outrageous that I was stunned. To call me a stranger? When I'm her mother-in-law and we lived together until recently. To come for a housewarming and be asked to pay an entrance fee. And such an exorbitant amount at that, while she smirked. As I digested what she had said, a raging anger began to boil inside me. Thinking back, she had always been extremely rude when we lived together. She looked down on me, yelled at me, and treated me like a servant, making me do household chores and take care of the grandchildren. Especially with the grandchildren, she would often leave them with me to go out. My son was entirely on her side, and it seemed like a lie that we used to be close. Before his marriage, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to teach them a lesson. With a blank expression, I looked at them and said, "Okay, then I'm going home." My son and his wife, able to drive me away, were laughing with a sense of victory. Turning my back on their new home, I headed straight to a certain place. 3 days later, "Hey, what is going on?" The reason my son and his wife rushed into our house pale-faced is my name is Grace. Since my only son Jack got a job and moved out, I've been living with my husband in a spacious house. Although I say he's my son, there is no blood relation between us. He was born to my husband and his former wife. But regardless of blood relation, I have loved him as my own child. And he has cherished me like his real mother. Since my son became independent, I've felt a bit lonely. But I've also enjoyed the freedom from parenting, and have been dedicating myself to my job every day. My husband and I both work at a company run by his brother. It's a small family-owned business, and both of us hold positions there. Thanks to both of us working and holding positions, I think we live a relatively affluent life. We were living an ordinary happy life. But I never expected we would face such a situation. Life is unpredictable. 3 years after starting his job, my son married a woman who also works at the same company. She was a beautiful woman with a great figure, and anyone would say she is beautiful. When I saw them smiling at each other during the family meeting and the wedding, I felt very reassured. A while after their marriage, I received the news that my daughter-in-law was pregnant. "Oh, congratulations. When is the baby due?" "Thanks. The due date is still quite far off. Is everything okay? You sound really down." Happy to hear the news of my first grandchild, I congratulated him. But his voice was somber. I asked him if there was a problem, and he started speaking in a feeble voice actually. According to my son, his wife takes great pride in her appearance. Since becoming pregnant, she couldn't stand the side of her belly growing, and her figure becoming fuller, and she was becoming increasingly hysterical. Every night she would step on the scale, look in the mirror and scream. My son would console her, saying, "It's proof that the baby is growing well. It's not that you've gained weight," but it seemed to have the opposite effect on her. My daughter-in-law saw my son as a husband who didn't understand her troubles, and her irritation only grew. Unable to endure her daily verbal abuse, my son felt overwhelmed. "I can't support her by myself, please help." He pleaded in tears, asking us to let them move in with us. Honestly, I didn't think moving in with us would distract my daughter-in-law, and there wasn't much support we could offer since we were working during the day. I told him that, but sympathizing with his plea that he might collapse if he continued to live alone with her, I consulted with my husband, and we decided to let them move in with us. From the day my son and his wife moved into our house, my impression of my daughter-in-law worsened. The first thing she said when she moved in was disparaging about our house. "What's with this house? It's so old and dirty. And it's cold too." I would have preferred a small apartment. Our house is an American-style house that has been built since my husband's grandfather's time. It can be said to have a quaint charm, but it is also old in many ways. There are gaps that let the wind through. So while I couldn't deny her complaints, it was incredibly rude of her to complain so blatantly in front of us, the homeowners and her in-laws. But her misconduct didn't stop at ridiculing our house. "Mother, can you make dinner quickly? And make sure to clean properly. It's unacceptable to have dust accumulate inside the house. What if something happens to the baby that's about to be born?" My daughter-in-law began to treat me like a servant and throw derogatory words at me. I once admonished her attitude, but she retorted, "I'm pregnant. What if I miscarry because of stress?" and refused to change her disrespectful behavior. I thought it unlikely she would miscarry just from that. But it's true that pregnant women are delicate and can't be taken lightly. I hoped her attitude would calm down after giving birth. Surely she was just irritable because things weren't going her way during pregnancy. Hormones would also be fluctuating, and she must be suffering. With that in mind, I reluctantly chose to endure her tyranny silently. A few months after my son and his wife started living with us, my daughter-in-law gave birth to a healthy baby. My husband and I were overjoyed at the birth of our long-awaited first grandchild. Exhausted from childbirth, my usually noisy daughter-in-law was quiet for a while postpartum, and we were able to enjoy a brief period of peace. However, about a month after the birth of the grandchild, our household became even more miserable than before. Soon after the birth of the grandchild, my husband was killed in a traffic accident. Stunned by the sudden loss of my husband, I managed to hold his funeral and returned home. In the living room, my daughter-in-law, who had not attended the funeral citing postpartum exhaustion, was sitting heavily on the sofa where my husband used to sit. Noticing my return, she hurled insults at me. Now that he's not around, even if he was hardly ever home because of work, the house feels a lot more spacious. It's kind of a breath of fresh air. I couldn't believe the words she said with a snort and doubted my ears. But she continued to denigrate my late husband, clearly disrespecting him in her heart. While my husband was a workaholic, I respected and loved him for his dedication to his work. Having my husband ridiculed by my daughter-in-law, who complained daily and acted haughtily without even knowing him well, was infuriating. Just as I was about to argue back, my son began to say something unbelievable. That's really true. He was never home but always nagging, which was annoying, joining in with his wife and mocking my husband. I had hoped he would reprimand her, but instead, he made the exact opposite remark. Stunned and at a loss for words, they said what they wanted and retreated to their bedroom. From that point on, my son's behavior flipped. He always just watched as his wife disrespected me and acted poorly, never calling her out on it. But after my husband's death, he began to agree completely with his wife and started to berate and command me. My son, who had never been rebellious since childhood and had a good relationship with me, his stepmother, suddenly started to act terribly. Could it be the influence of his wife? But apparently, I was the only one who felt that my son's attitude had suddenly changed. The reason his wife looked down on me, it seems, was that she had heard from my son that I was not his real mother. I know, you're not Jack's real mother, right? I heard he never really saw you as a mother. Besides, acting like a mother and bothering him all the time was annoying, and he said he had been putting up with it because of his father, but actually wanted to leave home. When she told me that, I felt as if the ground had collapsed beneath me. I couldn't believe my son thought of me that way. Smirking, she said, "That's why I have no reason to respect you either," and left. I stood there, stunned, watching her walk away. Moreover, the behavior of my son and his wife escalated. Not only hurling insults at me but also dumping their child on me and going out to play. They completely ignored my circumstances and went out day and night, saying they were going out with friends, doing whatever they liked, shopping and drinking. Sometimes, they would even go on a 2-day trip just by themselves on weekends. What were they thinking, leaving their breastfeeding grandchild and going out to play? Every time they dumped the grandchild on me, I protested. But they wouldn't listen. On the contrary, they even said, "You should feel privileged to spend time with your adorable grandchild." The worst part was them dumping the crying grandchild on me at night. "Hey, I was sleeping well, and you woke me up. Make him stop crying quickly. Having my sleep disturbed every night like this is unbearable. Make sure he's taken care of so he doesn't cry at night. It's natural for a baby to cry at night. No matter how well I take care of him during the day, a crying baby will cry." To demand that I fix that, and to dump the responsibility on me without trying to solve it themselves, shows they lack awareness as parents. Although I felt unjustified anger, if I refused to take care of my grandchild, he would probably be neglected. Unable to abandon my adorable grandchild, I had no choice but to take care of him as my son and his wife commanded. As time passed, years went by. My grandchild grew healthily and began to become less demanding, truly adorable. My son and his wife still dumped the grandchild on me and continued their lifestyle of going out. One day, when such days had become the norm, my daughter-in-law suddenly started being unreasonable. "I've had enough. This old shabby house is driving me crazy." Since the beginning of our cohabitation, she had complained about our house. Perhaps she couldn't take it anymore, or maybe because it wasn't much of a burden to leave the grandchild with me anymore. She suddenly started whining about wanting to move to a beautiful new house. Astonishingly, my son joined in, saying, "Actually, I've been putting up with this old-fashioned house for a long time," and they both expressed a desire to move. Although they complained, I thought they wouldn't actually move. While blocking out their constant whining, I lived on. However, a few months later, my son and his wife really did buy prime real estate in the city center and built a new house. "Now we can finally say goodbye to this rickety old house," they jubilantly said. Though I had my thoughts, I breathed a sigh of relief thinking I was finally free from them. On the day their new house was completed, I visited my son and his wife to see the new house as a celebration. When I arrived, there were many people there, including my daughter-in-law's friends, and her parents. Surrounded by many people, my son and his wife were proudly showing off their new house. They seemed busy, so after a quick tour of the house I decided to leave. When I approached them, they visibly showed displeasure and rejected me. "What brings you here? No way you can come in since you're a stranger." Stunned by their declaration of no entry, I was speechless. Then, as if she had thought of something great, she smirked. "If you really want to come in, then pay an entrance fee of $1,300. Her outrageous demand left me stunned. To call me a stranger when I was their mother-in-law, and we had lived together until recently. To come for a housewarming and be asked to pay an entrance fee, and to be confronted with such an exorbitant amount, while she smirked. As I digested what she had said, a boiling anger began to rise within me. Thinking back, she had always been incredibly rude even when we lived together. She looked down on me, hurled insults, and treated me like a servant, making me do household chores and take care of the grandchildren. Especially with the grandchildren, she often left them with me to go out. My son was completely on her side, and it seemed like a lie that we used to be a close-knit family before his marriage. It might be unavoidable that he doesn't think of me as his mother, but I thought I had raised him with love as his real son. Yet the moment my husband died, he stopped pretending and began to treat me superficially. Does he not feel any gratitude for how he was raised? I felt as if my kindness had been repaid with betrayal, and anger reddened my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I was determined to get revenge. With a blank expression, I looked at them and said, "All right then, I'm going home." "Oh, you came all the way here and you're not coming in? Well, that's fine, don't come back ever again." They laughed loudly as they drove me out, turning my back on their new home. I went home, and then straight to the bank. 3 days later, "Hey, what is going on?" My son and his wife with pale faces rushed to our house. They stormed in as if they were about to kick down the front door, but I dealt with them outside the entrance without letting them into the house. "Please stop shouting like that. You're bothering the folks next door. Shut up." The real issue here is, why is our bank account is empty? I admonished them without trying to hide my annoyance. But my daughter-in-law snapped back as if my attitude didn't matter. The bank account was empty. Knowing exactly what was going on, I suppressed the urge to laugh and casually said, "Oh, the bank account? I transferred all the money to another bank account. From now on, you'll have to pay for your living expenses, mortgage, and even clothes and drinks by yourselves." "What?" Hearing my response, my son and his wife were speechless. In fact, since they started living with us, they had been using my bank account for all their expenses, not only the living expenses and child-rearing costs, but also the money they lavishly spent on clothes and luxury brands, and even the down payment and land purchase for the newly built house had all been paid from my account. Looking back, I wish I hadn't spoiled them so much, but ever since I remarried my husband, I had always felt sympathetic towards my son. He lost his biological mother when he was young, and just after his own child was born, he lost his father. Although there was no blood connection, I wanted to support him as a mother. Indeed, I thought I had to. So, despite being insulted and treated terribly, I endured it and did what I could for him, thinking that was my way of expressing love. However, with this new house incident, I finally ran out of patience. If my son had become such a foolish person, then I was done. Perhaps my husband had anticipated such a day would come sooner or later. Before he passed, he said, "If something happens to me, cut ties with the son and his wife." When I first heard those words, having no bad feelings towards my son and his wife, I was surprised and asked why he would say that. Then my husband explained that he felt my son was foolish in every respect, and that the wife he chose was also a troublesome person. He spoke with specific episodes, but at the time I couldn't believe they would act that way and doubted my husband's intuition. However, the strong tone he used, unusually firm for him, was memorable. And ever since he died, those words had lingered in the back of my mind. Every time my son and his wife treated me horribly, I would pray and consult with my husband's portrait, and this time too, after declaring, "I think it's time to let go of my son," I headed to the bank. Perhaps being cut off from the bank account they had freely used until now was too much for them, as my son and his wife stood there, ashen-faced. "Is that all you wanted to talk about? If so, please leave now." "Wait, please." As I tried to enter the house, my son tried to stop me by grabbing the door. I knocked his hand away and faced them. "Sorry, but this house is off limits to strangers. I might consider it if you pay an entrance fee of $1,300. "What?" Using the same words his wife had said to me against them. They were stunned. They seemed indignant, but eventually, they left without a word. I thought I was finally free from trouble, but it wasn't that simple. The next day, my son and his wife came to visit our house again. Mom, good morning. Sorry about yesterday, it seems we both got a bit flustered. Are you angry? Oh, you seem tired, Mother. Shall I give you a shoulder massage? Their tone had completely changed from yesterday, trying to gauge my mood. His wife, who had never called me mother-in-law before, was now using that term while making coquettish gestures, clearly trying to ingratiate themselves with me. Instead of properly apologizing for their past actions, they superficially tried to ingratiate themselves to improve their situation, which was nothing short of shallow. They probably didn't think I was serious about disowning them. I was too disgusted to say anything, but their overly friendly approach was so annoying that I bluntly rejected them. No matter how much you try to butter me up now, I won't give you a penny anymore. Please leave. Realizing that their ingratiating tactics weren't working, they immediately dropped their smiling masks and started yelling in anger. Who do you think you are, acting all high and mighty after we showed you respect? Don't get cheeky with us, you old hag. Just give us the money. Their true nature came out, and they hurled unbearable insults at me. Their behavior lacked any decency. It was simply awful. As I considered calling for help because they were becoming a real nuisance. To the neighborhood, my daughter-in-law screamed, "Don't ignore me," and threw a potted plant from beside the entrance to the ground, shattering it. After a moment of silence, my son yelled again. "Just go ahead and die already, you old hag, then all your money will be mine." My daughter-in-law nodded in agreement with him. I was momentarily stunned by their statements and their behavior. My son thinks he will inherit everything? After grasping what he had said, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. It seems they were completely mistaken. What are you talking about? You don't have any inheritance rights. What? Don't make stuff up. They refused to believe it, but as I explained the facts, their faces grew pale. The truth is, I never legally adopted my son. Legally, he's just my husband's stepchild, and he has no rights to my estate. For my son to have inheritance rights, I would need to adopt him or write a will. And of course I have no intention of writing such a will. The only remaining option would be adoption. But I have already filed a non-acceptance declaration to prevent him from doing so unilaterally. In other words, unless I change my mind, there is no way my son can inherit my estate. So, even if I die, I will not give you any money. Now if you understand, please leave quickly. But, completely relying on inheriting my estate, the fact they learned was obviously a shock, and they were speechless and dumbfounded. Despite my urging them to leave, my son and his wife wouldn't move. Exasperated, I picked up my smartphone and made a call. "Hello, is this the police? Actually, a potted plant at my home was broken." "Yes, the culprits are still in front of me, so could you please come and arrest them quickly?" "What?" "The police." I called the nearest police station. I had reported the destruction of the potted plant by my daughter-in-law as property damage. Realizing they were reported to the police, they trembled and fled from my home before the police arrived. Watching them hastily flee, I finally felt that the problems that had plagued me 4 years were resolved, and I sighed with great relief. Later, although the potted plant was broken, I decided not to press charges as I had no injuries, and I just wanted to drive my son and his wife away from my home, considering the potted plant was not that expensive. I decided it was better to let things go without making a big fuss or risking retaliation. Sometime later, I heard through the grapevine that my son and his wife continued their extravagant lifestyle, which nearly ruined them. Thinking there was still money in my son's account, my daughter-in-law didn't stop her spending and used her credit cards. She miscalculated badly. There wasn't much savings in my son's account. As a result, my son couldn't keep up with the mortgage for their new home and his wife's spending, and he started to accumulate debts. The debts became so overwhelming that, in desperation, my son even embezzled money from his company. He was quickly caught and dismissed from his job. Drowning in debt and now unemployed, my daughter-in-law demanded a divorce, implying she had no use for him anymore. However, my son refused to agree to the divorce, and their argument eventually led to a lawsuit. Astonishingly, during the legal battle, it was revealed that the grandchild was not my son's child. In other words, my daughter-in-law cheated on my son. This added financial problems to the situation, making their divorce even more of a fight. They're still tangled up in a nasty legal dispute, always hurling insults at each other. As for me, I've been freed from the troublesome issues with my son's family that had been a headache for years, and I've been able to devote myself more to my work. As a result, our company's sales have multiplied, and both the staff and my own reputation have improved. There's no further promotion or salary increase, but I wasn't particularly interested in that anyway. Instead, I want to work harder for the employees who look up to me. Now alone in the spacious house that my late husband and I shared, I continue to live here. Every day, I talk to my husband at the portrait and spend my days peacefully.